Stripped, Christina Aguilera's second album of new material, became an era-defining record in the early noughties, and with it she became one of the biggest pop stars on the planet. But subsequent albums in the following years didn't match up critically or commercially. Yes, there were other factors at play. Record sales were in decline. Not for Adele though, but plenty of artists have had eras which didn't match their career highs, but were still considered successful eras because they spawned a number of hit singles or achieved healthy sales. This wasn't really the case for Christina after Stripped. So in this video I will put forth 3 theories as to why the American diva never again scaled the heights she did with Stripped. You might not agree with them, they are just my humble opinions, but that's what the video is about anyway. Let's get into it. For the first 5 albums of her career, if you include her Christmas album and first Spanish album, Christina was under the guidance of the highly respected A&R music executive Ron Fair. He's the man who signed her to RCA as a 17-year-old and was instrumental in her becoming an international superstar. Ron Fair did A&R on Christina's first 3 albums of new material, which means he helped pair her with the songwriters and producers that she worked with on those records, and he helped her pick the songs. He was the executive producer on her debut album, co-executive producer on Stripped with Christina, and by Back to Basics he allowed his protege to take over the reins as the executive producer. Ron Fair has had a long and illustrious career and clearly has those golden ears you need to recognise talent and to pick hit songs. Ron Fair left RCA in 2001 and became head of A&M Records the same year, but continued to work with Christina on her albums up until and including Back to Basics in 2006. Whilst at A&M, he oversaw the launch of the hugely successful Pussycat Dolls and Vanessa Carlton, who had a massive hit with 1,000 Miles. He also encouraged a young singer called Stacey Ferguson, who had been in a girl group called Wild Orchid he had signed a few years previously, to come and join a then unknown group on A&M Records. That group were of course the Black Eyed Peas, who went on to become one of the biggest bands in the world during the noughties. He also played a significant role in launching Fergie as a successful solo artist. I've included all this information in the video because I wanted to stress how influential and talented this guy is. He clearly has the Midas touch. His lessening influence on Christina's career seemed to correlate with a decline in her popularity. The follow-up to Stripped, Back to Basics, was initially well received but fell far short of Stripped's commercial success. It had 19 tracks spread over 2 CDs, and most critics agreed it was far too long and covered way too much ground. There were just 3 international singles, which failed to match the success achieved by the singles from Stripped. And then her 4th album, Bionic, became a critical and commercial failure. It was the first album of hers which Ron Fair had no influence on. Whilst the album still has a loyal band of followers and Christina still maintains that the record was ahead of its time, there's no denying that Bionic was a catalyst for a slump in her career from which she's never really recovered. Bionic featured a dizzying array of collaborators by anyone's standard, with pop R&B producers working on it along with left-field electronica artists. As you'd imagine, the album ended up sounding seriously disjointed. Not to mention the video for the lead single, which felt really forced and employed shock tactics which just fell flat. According to an interview with Billboard magazine from 2010, Aguilera says that she assembled Bionic not through RCA's A&R department, but by contacting the musicians and producers directly herself. I'm not saying it's the only reason the record didn't work out, but it's a strong possibility. Without Ron Fair's input, things kind of went awry. And after the relative failure of Bionic, Christina went back to working with an A&R person from her record label on her next 2 albums, Lotus and Liberation. Scott Storch achieved phenomenal success in the early noughties, co-writing hits such as Beyonce's Baby Boy, Mario's Let Me Love You, 50 Cent's Candy Shop, and Cry Me a River for Justin Timberlake. He co-wrote and produced 7 of the 16 songs on Stripped, including 2 of its singles, Can't Hold Us Down and Fighter, the latter in particular becoming a big hit and helping Stripped to clock up sales many months after its initial release. I think most fans would agree that Scott played a key role in making the album the huge success it became. And with big hits came big money. Scott started living the high life, and by 2006 he had a full-blown cocaine addiction, and by 2009 he'd filed for bankruptcy, having squandered his multi-million-pound fortune on private jets and drugs. Christina had wanted him to collaborate with her on Back to Basics, but according to Billboard in 2014, he passed up on that opportunity so he could work on his then girlfriend Paris Hilton's album. The guy admits to having been really heavy on drugs at the time, so that might explain that decision. The story also goes that he demanded Christina fly out his entire entourage to Los Angeles so he could record with her, which she rightly refused to do. She even recorded a not very good song interlude called Fuss on Back to Basics about the debacle. Maybe if they'd worked together again they wouldn't have been able to recreate that magic. You can't just bottle up creativity, but I can't help but think that Christina's following albums would have been more consistent with his input. Other than Linda Perry, I don't think Christina's found a better collaborator since. There were rumours in recent years that Christina and Scott had reconciled, but maybe their time has now passed. Christina also worked with legendary producer Glenn Ballard on The Voice Within from the album. Stripped was a year old by the time it was released, but the song still performed well, reaching the top 10 in the UK, top 40 in the US, and becoming a big airplay hit all around the world. And I've heard it countless times over the years on talent shows, which surely must point to the song's enduring popularity. Christina and Glenn never worked together again from what I know, and I'm not sure why, because they created magic on that track. And my third and final point is that Christina has always been a rebel, and she isn't willing to just toe the line. She isn't an artist who is 100% hit driven and preoccupied with what's the most commercial thing to do. This was apparent right from the very beginning of her career when she regularly expressed her disapproval of her debut album and single. Speaking to Rolling Stone in 2000, she had this to say about the record. I wanted the first record to be a little bit more on the R&B side, but they wanted to keep it pop. My A&R executive guy Ron Fair produced it, and he was always curbing my ad-libs and my runs and all that R&B dripping stuff. It would drive me insane because he was always saying, stick to the melody, keep it pop. So the second album will be my time to let loose finally. The next single is Come On Over, and I'm like, oh no, that's probably the most kiddie sounding song on the record. We are going to get back in the studio to redo it. In 2010, Sia gave some insight into Christina's true music tastes and her indie sensibilities. There's this misconception that she's a middle America kind of person, but she's a little hipster. You go back to her house and sit by the fire with some wine, and The Knife and Arthur Russell is playing over the sound system. She doesn't listen to pop music. In the same interview with Billboard from 2010, Christina expressed ambivalence about having hit songs. I do have songs on there where I went into them saying, okay, let's make a more commercially driven record. That's maybe where Not Myself Tonight comes from. There was actually a song that the label really wanted me to record and I just said no, because it didn't fit on the album. It wasn't creatively inspiring to me. They said it's a hit, and absolutely it's a hit for someone. But it's not for me, because when it jeopardizes my integrity too much, I can't do it. Who Let the Dogs Out was a fucking hit, you know what I mean? Christina was always a risk taker, and with Stripped, those risks paid off, but on later projects less so. And some of Christina's ideas can be a little left field. For example, releasing Back to Basics as a double CD was not the savviest move to make. She talked about this in an interview in 2006. There was definitely some hesitation at first. As a business decision, I'm really shooting myself in the foot to make a double record. It was a huge conversation, but Clive felt I deserved this, so I got my way. You would be right in saying that Beyonce did the same thing 2 years later with Sasha Fierce, but there were less songs on that album, more hits, and a clearer distinction between the two CDs, so it seemed to be more effective. Not to pit two artists against one another, but Madonna, like Christina, has always had a strong artistic vision, and has often leaned towards more left field collaborators and producers. But somehow or another, the end results always still feel like a Madonna record. Mad just seems to strike the right balance between art and commerce, something Christina seems to struggle with. And I think it's important to say that maybe Christina doesn't want that strict level of success again. She's got a family now, she's a squillionaire, and she probably doesn't want to constantly be under pressure to turn out hit songs and to tour the world to promote them. In all likelihood, she is much happier doing things on a smaller scale. And who are we to judge anyway? And hopefully one day this video will become invalid when Christina does pull off a huge comeback. Fingers crossed. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts on anything in this video, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos.